Hello, my dear friends. I'm gladly greeting you again. We are going on Periscope depth. And once again, Major Scott Ritter is my very welcome guest. Hello. How are
Hello.
you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
That's great. That's great to know. I'm fine, thank you. Well, a little bit overwhelmed with my duties as a deputy editor, so it comes with a job. So, sir, last time we met, it was more than a month ago. A lot of things have happened. I just wanted to ask you a brief overview what happened in Ukraine, which is worth mentioning, to your opinion.
I mean, it's a continuation of the same trends that existed a month ago, but they're reaching culmination. I mean, when we spoke last time, I made it clear that my assessment is that Ukraine is losing this conflict, and that Ukraine will lose this conflict, and their defeat will be decisive, and that it will be sometime this year. I continue to believe all of that. There's nothing that's happened to alter that analysis. In fact, what's happening only confirms the analysis. The battle for Bakhmut or Artyomsk, I can't. Am I pronouncing that incorrectly?
You're absolutely correct.
Okay, is coming to its tragic conclusion. And when I say tragic, I mean the loss of humanity on both sides has been considerable for Ukrainians. It has been backbreaking, according to the to both Ukraine and Russian sources. The level of casualties that have been incurred on the Ukrainians is beyond comprehension. Um, Ukrainians, there's a lot of talk about a spring offensive, but one has to wonder, how do you turn rhetoric into reality? Where is this equipment going to come from? Where is the manpower going to come from? Um, how do they plan on attacking Russian defenses that have been prepared in depth for months now? And how do they deal with the fact that the Russians continue to carry out comprehensive offensive operations throughout the length of the line of contact? The West is getting exhausted from this war. Again, rhetoric is one thing, reality is another. The quantity and quality of equipment is starting to diminish, along with the political willingness to continue to underwrite this war, this very expensive war. There's a lot of pressure being put on Ukraine by the West to accept a negotiated settlement. Russia has made it clear they have specific objectives that have to be fulfilled, and that they're not going to negotiate those away, that any negotiation would have to meet all Russian objectives. So whether the two can come together, we'll see. I think that there's still a lot of fighting left. There's going to be some very violent fighting, bloody fighting. Both sides are going to suffer casualties, but Russia is on track to achieve the strategic defeat of the Ukrainian military by the end of summer, early fall of this year. The political aspects of this conflict, politics are always more complicated. And how Russia achieves denazification hasn't been articulated by Russia itself. So we don't know what their plan is. I've spoken to some people who talk about, you know, sort of military law for a period of time, re-education, tribunals, arrests, imprisonment. And again, that's rhetoric. Turning that rhetoric into reality is always a challenge. So I think Russia has an easier task defeating the Ukrainian military, and a more difficult task coming up with a way to bring conflict termination, and yet on terms that are acceptable to Russia, but also acceptable to the West. I mean, Russia at some point in time will have to make a decision how they want this war to end. And understanding that if their conditions are too stark, then the West won't concede, and the war could continue with tragic consequences. Again, every death is a tragedy. So we'll see what happens with the politics. But this is a this is still a conflict that Russia has all the advantages. There's no disadvantages for Russia right now.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, I did have a live stream where my viewers were asking questions, and I was answering them. There was a question about Odessa, and I figured that the best way for Odessa would be sucking off the military of the city. I mean, so pulling it off to someplace another where they need it. So Odessa would be way more empty city. I mean the military, Ukrainian military. And that would, in some point, be easier not to turn Odessa into Mariupol when it comes to storming the city. Or maybe the storming would not be necessary. What do you think about it?
One of the problems with war is that the enemy always gets a vote. So it doesn't matter what you want. It matters what the enemy wants as well. And it's my belief that Russia cherishes Odessa. It is a city of historic importance. It's not just a city of contemporary value, but one of historic cultural importance. And Russia would be loath to see it put to the sword, so to speak. I don't believe Russia wants a repeat of Mariupol anywhere, but especially in a city like Odessa. But it's not just Russia's choice. Russia will do what it has to do to achieve its stated objectives. But this is why I've always believed that when Vladimir Putin answered the question from the Hungarian journalist last summer, that answer was extraordinarily important. I'm somebody who actually listens to what the Russian president says and respects the fact that he's a man who isn't trivial. When he says things, there's thought behind it, and that we should respect his words. So when he indicated that Odessa could be the key to military victory or the key to peace, I take him very seriously. And so I know there's a lot of Russian people. I always, emotions run high. And I always speak about the potential of a peace settlement that leaves Odessa in Ukrainian hands. And they say, never, never, never. Well, they're not the Russian president. They don't have the weight of tens of thousands of lives on their shoulders. They don't have the future of their country on their shoulders. They don't have to live with the consequences of destroying a city of the cultural and historic value of Odessa. Vladimir Putin does. And I also think that he thinks strategically, meaning that while there may be animosity and rancor today between Russia and Ukraine, at some point in time, the Russian vision must be to peacefully coexist with Ukraine as neighbors, not as enemies. And as such, if there is a way to terminate this conflict, demilitarize Odessa, have it an open city under Ukrainian sovereign control, but one that respects its Russian heritage and is tolerant of a Russian population and Russian language and religion, etc., where Russians can freely travel to and fro, that's not a bad outcome. That's not a bad outcome compared to the alternative, which would be to assault the city, raze the city, destroy the city. You know, in Vietnam, there was a saying, we had to destroy the village to save the village. And if you reflect on that, that's about as dumb as it can get. So if the concept is you have to destroy Odessa to save Odessa, you might want to rethink your approach. But again, both sides have a vote on this. I have said all along that Vladimir Putin and the Russian government have been the adults in the room. That while the children scream and gnash and tear things apart, the adults stand back and think, beyond the chaos. But how do we get them to lunch? How do we get them to take a nap? How do we get them, through the day? And I believe that that's the role the Russian government's playing right now. It's frustrating for people who will allow their emotions to be overtaken by the tragedy of this war. I'm not being critical of those people. You're talking to somebody who can get very emotional himself about issues. I know what anger is. I know what frustration is. But I also know that if you sleep on an issue, when you wake up in the morning, oftentimes you have a wiser approach to separate yourself from the emotion and think about the practicalities. And that's Vladimir Putin's job. His job is to sleep on the issue, separate himself from the emotion, and think about the practicalities. So I personally believe that the Russian government, and again, I listened to his speech on February 21st. There was no talk about taking Odessa. There was no talk about taking Dnipropetrovsk. There was no talk about taking Kharkov. Those are three cities with significant Russian populations that easily, if there was a referendum, you could achieve the votes necessary to justify annexation. But he's not talking about that because the Russian goal has never been to annex Ukrainian territory. Russia was compelled to do so because of Ukrainian actions and because of the will of the people residing in those territories. But if this war can come to an end, I would hasten to bet that if you went and interviewed an ethnic Russian in Odessa and gave them a choice if your choice is live under the heel of a Nazified Ukrainian government or have the Russian army come in and liberate you regardless of the consequence, I believe many would have the Russian army come in and liberate us, whatever the consequence. But that the goal is to live in a peaceful Odessa, free of oppression, paying taxes to a Ukrainian government that is tolerant of your religion, your ethnicity, your language, and being able to freely interact with Russia so that you don't lose that connectivity, all the while living in a city that has been untouched by war. I think people would take that. That's not a bad option, especially if you say you get to have your children, they're alive, your parents are alive, your friends are alive, your colleagues are alive. There are many people in Mariupol and Bakhmut. I apologize for fumbling that word, and elsewhere who can't say the same thing. They can't say their children are alive. They can't say their parents are alive. They can't say their friends are alive, their colleagues are alive, because they died in the battle for those cities. And if you ask them, was it worth it? That'd be a tough question to answer. What is the price you give for your children? What is the price for your parents? What is the price for your friends, for your family? And so I think that's the thought process right now regarding Odessa. But again, I don't know. This is just analysis. I don't have my red phone that I can pick up, push the button, and talk to the Russian president. So this is speculation made by an American thousands of miles removed from the problem. Vladimir Putin's statement was made in the summer of 2022. A lot has happened since then. And there are more factors that must be considered by him and the rest of the Russian government. So perhaps their thinking has changed, but nothing can change the fact that you don't want to be in a situation where in order to save Odessa, you have to destroy Odessa.
Yeah. By all means, Vladimir Putin is one of the most sober-minded leaders which I know. And right now you just touched the nerve because I feel the most lucky guy. Because my father, my aunt, my cousin, my father's wife, and some friends, they all survived the battle for Mariupol. They all came out, made it out alive. So I can't just even say anything about the choice our president does have, because all of my dear ones are alive, and lucky me, and that's why my mouth is shut on this question. I cannot just sitting over here where no bullet flying over me, saying whether I want this or that. That's not a choice for me to make. Yeah, and I'm saying this mostly for those of you, my dear friends, who thinks it's an easy job to be a president. Nothing like that.
No.
It's not an easy job even for Joe Biden, by the way, no matter how we don't like him. My dear friends, thank you for watching this episode of Periscope Depth. Please make sure to visit scottritterextra.com to look for Scott Ritter's books and a lot of valuable stuff there. The link is on the description. If you liked what you saw, you might consider subscribing to my channel or even supporting it, due to all the channels in Russia are demonetized by YouTube. The link to donation alerts is also on the description. My dear friends, I really hope to see you soon. Sincerely yours, Dmitry Zolotarev. Bless you.